Released in 2004, May Nikki is a wonderful bundle of uneasy vibes and abstract dream logic. You play as Madatsuki, a young shut-in who spends her time sleeping and playing video games. Inside Madatsuki's dreams, you explore a plethora of bizarre, disturbing, or outright terrifying dream worlds in an effort to collect 24 different effects, objects that change your appearance and abilities. The origin and development of May Nikki is somewhat shrouded in mystery. Produced by the elusive Kikiyama, we don't know anything about them, who they are, age, race, or gender. All we know is that they live in Japan. The game is interesting to say the least. Acting more like a playable art exhibit than a video game, no dialogue, choices, or story are present, and players are left to explore a curious dream world devoid of any stated purpose outside of a brief, minimalistic tutorial upon starting a playthrough. Despite being relatively unknown, May Nikki has made a massive impact on the indie gaming industry, being one of the first successful RPG Maker games to reach the internet. Other games to follow would draw great inspiration from the subtle but effective graphics and ambience first seen in May Nikki. I know that a lot of my personal inspiration and creativity has been inspired by it. I first heard of May Nikki from an old Peanut Butter Gamer video where he mentions it in passing.
First character on our list comes from a free downloadable game called May Nikki. Now, I've yet to find time to actually sit down and play this game a lot, so I do admit I don't know that much about it, but what I do know is that she looks like a kitty.
And while it wasn't the focal point of the video by any means, childhood me really latched onto it. Showcasing an air of mystique and cultish following, I couldn't help but be influenced by it at the time. But even after I found it, my initial intrigue did eventually fade, and I did end up shying away from it due to developing other interests. But after I left that unbelievably long phase of my life, I regained my affinity for strange and unsettling games, and by proxy, May Nikki. Initially, May Nikki presents as a strange but light-hearted walking simulator. Starting in your room, you soon discover that your adorable main character, Madatsuki, is a shut-in, presumably suffering from some aversion to leaving her apartment located in this honestly pretty brutalist-looking skyscraper. You can play video games or sit on the floor, but that's about it. The real game doesn't start until you climb into bed. Entering the dream world, initially nothing seems different, but now, Madatsuki can open the door to her apartment into a nexus of other multicolored doors, all of which leading to different dream worlds. This is the point where May Nikki's gameplay loop will start, and most new players will simply pick a door with no particular goal in mind. Say you pick the red-scaled door, the one that leads out to the graffiti world. Exploring around for a while, you might begin to feel disoriented. The strange, scrolling images in the background and ambient music have been known to make people feel uneasy. The gameplay loop can definitely get a little boring after a long period of time though, especially after you've collected all the effects except one, but your hubris isn't letting you look up a walkthrough, so you just wander forever. But in all my time playing this game, the unsettling feeling has never really gone away, due in large part to the music. Can we talk about the music? I think I'm gonna talk about the music now. May Nikki's soundtrack has little to no actual songs in it, but God is it effective at making you feel unsafe at all times. A few favorites of mine being Snow World, Barrack Settlement, and Pink Sea. Despite the overall melancholy emptiness that is fronted, there are occasional moments of kindness, though few and far between. Like when you leave the dream world to write in your journal. The soft, music box tones relax the droning unease inflicted upon you, and you are allowed to rest before diving headfirst back into bed. This aspect of the soundtrack has always affected me more than anything. I'm reminded of the Silent Hill games where the only time you get some semblance of comfort is when you find yourself in a save room. Like I said, the game tries to avoid featuring much actual music, falling into a similar box as the popular dementia simulator Everywhere at the End of Time. And while the audio is an important part of any game, the visuals are what really knock it out of the park on this one. Trippy is the best word that anyone could really use to describe it. You go from an infinitely repeating room with some stuff in it, to a collection of bright neon monsters, to a spaceship with this man on board, before taking a nap and crash landing on a photorealistic Mars where UFOs hover around in the background like it's no big deal. On a first playthrough, you never really know what's coming next. The game even swaps to a style resembling Mother for the NES, or Earthbound Beginnings if you're a fucking nerd. And while the gameplay loop of May Nikki can get boring, the areas themselves never really get tiresome. I've played through this game more times than I would like to admit, and even I still find new things on every playthrough. Throughout the game, Madatsuki will explore areas that walk the fine line of liminality, always making you feel like you aren't quite alone, and sometimes you aren't. While most of the game is safe to explore with no consequence, occasionally you will come across enemies. While non-specific, the Terrenigan make for excellent chasers. It's not entirely certain where the trope began, but the idea of chaser enemies was popularized by the Resident Evil series and slowly leaked out into the horror genre to become a very popular enemy type. May Nikki implements this in a quiet and effective way. Unlike Resident Evil or other AAA games, there's no indicator telling you that they're around. While the disturbing nature of May Nikki is only hidden just below its surface, many of the game's more disturbing events and scenes are buried in corners that most people won't find on their first playthrough, or any playthrough for that matter. One fan favorite is FACE, spelled in all caps. In order to activate it, you have to 1. Go to sleep, 2. Go to the Nexus, 3. Open the door to the number world, and 4. Look at this funny creature. 5. If it's happy, then you need to wake up. 6. Rinse and repeat until you come back and the creature is sad. 7. Equip the knife effect and stab it. 8. Walk through the creature's open mouth. And 9. Open this door. And finally, another example of these events lie in the Pink Sea. Enter the snow world and look for this igloo. Go inside and a strange puddle of pink water is coming up from under the ice. Interacting with the puddle transports you to the Pink Sea, and after wandering around for a little while, you'll eventually come across a house. Upon entering, you'll see a light switch, and turning off said light switch will result in the lights turning off. What a lot of people won't catch is that upon entering the house, there is a 1 in 60 chance that turning off the lights will trigger a secret event. On my most recent playthrough, it took me 54 tries, but upon the 55th time entering the house, stuck inside the room with no other choice, we are forced to approach the creature standing before us, which transports us into a linear corridor with this thing in the background, and at this point, the only way to escape is to wake up. Sigmund Freud was a peculiar man, to say the least. Apart from his many adventures into crack cocaine, most of which involving his nieces and nephews, in his college years he was tasked by his university to locate the reproductive organs of eels. At the time, it wasn't well understood how adult eels reproduced, and as such, scientists saw no other way to find out other than tasking this man with locating them. Freud would end up ripping apart over 400 eels before proclaiming that all of them were females and demanded to be brought more specimens. This is the same man that would later go on to become the father of modern psychology and change the way we handle mental health treatment in the modern era. Lots of Freud's ideas have been abandoned in the modern day due to their somewhat questionable nature, but one of his less cracked out ideas involved the analysis of dreams. Many people to this day believe that dreams are just the brain manifesting your subconscious desires while you sleep, and most of those many are unaware of the origins of that belief. I am constantly bombarded with articles and videos and books titled something along the lines of "What Your Dreams Really Mean" or "Top 10 Most Common Dreams and What They Mean." And while people are certainly entitled to their beliefs, more than anything, I find them to be an annoyance. But sometimes they can be a window into the way people think and how they process the world around them. May Nikki, to no one's surprise, is constantly subjected to fan theories and speculations. So I think it would be good to go over a few of the more popular fan theories. This is a content warning. If you are sensitive to discussions about sexual assault, violence, mental illness, and other serious issues, now is the time to pause the video and skip to this time frame. You have been warned. First and foremost is the mental illness theory. Hikikomori, or social withdrawal, is a uniquely modern issue going on in the larger population centers of Japan right now, where young adults are completely removing themselves from society, spending all their time inside, and refusing to leave their apartments. It appears that Matsutsuki is one of these young adults, overwhelmed to the point of isolation. Although none of this is told to us explicitly, we do get some hints of the possible issues Matsutsuki faces. The word Terenigen is a portmanteau of the two words Tori, meaning bird, and Ningen, meaning person, a name that matches their design very well. However, something that isn't literally spelled out for you is that all of the Terenigens, hostile or not, dress to resemble typical teenage girls, a choice that could definitely be construed as symbolism. On one occasion, should the player make it to the area known as the Wilderness, Matsutsuki is able to find herself observing a gathering of Terenigens listening to music in what looks to be a picnic, but is unable to join them herself, separated by a thick growth of strange plants. Maybe Matsutsuki feels isolated from other people her age, viewing them as monsters that try to chase her down. Maybe she's a victim of bullying, an issue that Japan as a country struggles with more than others. Some of the effects you collect in the game also support this idea. In the docks area, players can come across this figure eating some fruit. Interacting with it grants the player the fat effect, which makes you fat. Eating disorders and self-image problems are some of the most common issues young people face, so this could be a not-so-subtle hint at Matsutsuki's view of herself. Walking around in the mural world, players might find the blonde hair effect. Japanese pop culture has a tendency in recent years to lean towards a Hollywood style of feminine beauty, typically translating blonde hair as being the most attractive. This could be the game showing us how Matsutsuki wants to look, or the ideal version of herself. There's plenty of other examples strewn about the dream world that can support this theory, from the many sets of staring eyes representing her potential social anxiety to the crowds of monsters and abstract figures showing us how Matsutsuki might view other people. The game goes a long way to show us themes of anxiety and depression, but is also somehow rather vague with its representation, choosing to show symbolism for mental illness as a whole rather than one specific condition or problem Matsutsuki might face. Altogether, this theory is rather solid and has lots of ground to walk on. Definitely worth considering. Up next is the brain damage theory. Throughout the game, you come across a lot of rather gory imagery, but a reoccurring motif in these scenarios is car crashes and injury resulting from said crashes. In the forest, Matsutsuki can come across a man with green skin lying on the road in a puddle of blood, surrounded by traffic cones. Interacting with him gives you the traffic light effect, which pauses entities in place. Some people think the man laying in the road, nicknamed Corpse San by the community, is representative of Matsutsuki. Corpse-san is only one piece of evidence that supports this theory, however. Another similar event can be found in the White Desert. Entering this door brings you into a black room with a road stretching through the middle. There is what looks to be a small child standing in the middle of the road, and using the aforementioned traffic light effect near her triggers this event. And while it's really quite silly looking, the arms and other limbs poking out of her body could be an interpretation of bones broken in the impact of a car crash from the eyes of a traumatized onlooker. This whole theory basically states that Madatsuki was just in a coma the whole time, and I don't think that this one is very true. It has small, more or less circumstantial evidence supporting it, and I just don't believe it. There are many scenes that you can encounter that make it seem like Madatsuki might have killed somebody. One theory states that Madatsuki accidentally hit a little girl with her car, supported by the same girl in the White Desert, and has been suffering from intense guilt ever since. One aspect of the game that tends to mess with people is the reoccurring themes of violence. Early on in progression, Madatsuki can pick up the knife effect, which lets her kill most NPCs that you can encounter, all of which make a shrill scream upon stabbing them. On top of this, so many NPCs in the game leak, drip, or cough up blood at the slightest interaction, leading many to theorize that Madatsuki is actually a serial murderer, or yandere of some sort, potentially killing her crush or boyfriend in the process shown by Corpse-san laying in the road. Yeah, I don't really know about this theory. On one hand, it is strange that Madatsuki is having intense gore be a common theme in her dreams, but on the other hand, everybody has violent fantasies on occasion, whether that be ramming into the people that cut you off in traffic or punching a superior in the face for being a dick. It's pretty common overall, so I don't believe this one, really. In Madatsuki's dream world, an unnerving motif is that of sexual violence. Many of the monsters we find resemble male or female sex organs. For example, these eyeball monsters bear a resemblance to a uterus, or this creature, dubbed Kyukyukun by the community for the onomatopoeia for rubbing something in Japanese, resembling a phallus. Furthermore, there are many scenarios where Madatsuki is left alone with an uncomfortable or disturbing assailant. The aforementioned Kyukyukun is found suggestively rubbing a handrail right before the face event occurs. Many people also suggest that face itself looks like the head of a phallus. Or in this scene in the dark forest where you enter a train car and are forced to sit next to a shadowy figure for a prolonged period of time to progress. There's also lots of hand imagery, most of which depicts said hands reaching out to grab Madatsuki. That, combined with the chasing nature of the Pteranogons, suggests that Madatsuki probably doesn't like being touched. One used around 4chan suggests that this is evidence of her being the survivor of a violent rape. And, as disturbing as that is, the theory holds up. Japan as a culture is not welcome to sexual assault victims, with the chikan, or train groping phenomenon, becoming such a problem that most Japanese trains have a female-only car to prevent this type of incident. Cutting back to the mental health theory, victims are often bullied for speaking out against their attackers. One woman's account claiming that the police wouldn't even file a report because she didn't do anything to stop her assailant. Piecing together the evidence found in-game, from the man in the train, to Oboa, to Kyukyukun, to Face, paints a startling picture of a girl who was assaulted and then shunned by her peers and those around her. So she hides herself away in her apartment, refusing to leave. This, for some godforsaken reason, is by far the most popular theory in the May Nikki community. But I don't know how much I personally really buy into it. The themes that promote the theory are definitely there, don't get me wrong. This is absolutely uterus-shaped and nobody can tell me otherwise, and this is definitely suggestive in ways that I'm not comfortable with, but in the end, they seem like they tie better into other theories or fears. Still, the argument is startlingly convincing, to say the least. The effect Yume Nikki had, and to a certain degree still has on the indie gaming industry, is somewhat startling. Some of the big indie releases from the past decade have had undeniable influence from Yume Nikki, but two that come to mind the most are Undertale and Omori. While both fail to have any direct references, it's clear that they were heavily inspired by Yume Nikki, both in vibes as well as area/character design. Like, you're trying to tell me this guy came into existence in 2004, and then shortly after, all these guys just showed up all on their own, and you want me to accept it as coincidence? You're a piece of shit. But lots of direct instances of inspiration do exist, primarily in the form of fan games. Lots and lots of fan games, a topic that a favorite YouTuber of mine, shout out to NitroRad, has covered in depth, so I won't go too into it here, but while most of the fan games are a little strange, some really stand out and even go above and beyond what Yume Nikki is on its own. Two that really come to mind are Yume Tuki and Dot Flow, both of which feature radically different styles of game design but still manage to feel the same level of surrealty. Dot Flow focuses primarily on the straight up gory, horror-esque aspects of Yume Nikki, while Yume Tuki operates on the same level as a fan-made sequel, leaning more towards the surreal aspects of the original. Both games are really good, and I recommend them to anyone who is a fan of the original. But in the end, Yume Nikki stands as a monument to the surreal and obscure nature of early indie horror games, a monument that went on to inspire many others. I feel like a lot of people think of Yume Nikki as a horror game, you know? I just called it a horror game a couple seconds ago, but I don't really agree with that anymore. To me, it's more of a character study than anything, but one that examines the studier more than the actual character. Kikiyama has stated that Yume Nikki has no explicit meaning, and what it all means is up to those who try to interpret it. The game definitely presents as horror. The first areas you can enter are unnerving, and I feel like the main culprit behind Yume Nikki's horror status is those first few areas. But if you peek just below that nightmarish surface, you begin to empathize with Madatsuki and the characters in her head, all done with no dialogue whatsoever. To me, it's a game about finding beauty in the surreal. No game has ever really been able to recreate the vibe of the original. Even the Nintendo Switch remake fails to match that feeling of bizarre elegance, and while fan games have tried, they still lack that feeling. To be honest, I don't think anything ever will. Yume Nikki came to me at a time in my life where I didn't have the tools to appreciate it, but that rediscovery years later felt like a punch to the face. I don't understand how I wasn't obsessed with it at the time, at least to the same level as... But once I had those tools to see through that top layer, I just couldn't resist. So many hours of my life have just been spent wandering around the dream world. I remember once in 6th grade I managed to get an emulator to run Yume Nikki on my phone, and oh my god, I spent every car trip for the next year just playing it on my little Android. Unlike FNAF or Creepypasta or Slenderman, the mystique around Yume Nikki hasn't faded, and that's not something a lot of games can accomplish. There's something special about it that prevents that inevitable march into mundane routine, and whatever that is really fascinates me. However obscure or cult-like in its following, Yume Nikki is nothing short of beautiful. 16. Alright,
Really?
Kalimba time. Kalimba, it's gonna happen.
Yes!
Let's hang up.
Kalimba.
That's terrifying.